Welcome to the War Room. It's not Stephen K. Bannon, it's Natalie G. Winters hosting today for our fourth hour of the War Room on Tuesday, January 2nd. It's going to be the first time I say it in the year of our Lord 2024. Can you believe it? I think this is my first time in the War Room since New Year's, since Christmas, or I guess I hosted in the morning about a week ago. But 2024 is obviously an election year. It's so important. War Room is going to be at the tip of the spear, as we always are, covering all of that. But remember, 2024 is also a very, very important year because it's just 1 year left until all of these weird globalist organizations, the UNs of the world, the WHOs of the world, the WEFs of the world, I'll even throw in another three-letter little summary in there, the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, have all of their shady agendas set to culminate in 2025, whether that's made in China 2025, that's of course the Chinese Communist Party, you got the sustainable development goals, these smart cities, you name it. All of these, as I'm sure Harnwell would say, sociopathic overlords, the agendas they have for us, believe me, they are ramping up full gear, full speed ahead in the year 2024. And that's why it's so important we have Donald J. Trump back in office to make sure that those agendas don't materialize. But it's always great to be in the War Room. And I think there's no better person to start off 2024 with in terms of charting out our battle plan for the, I'm sure, many battles the World Economic Forum would call them polycrises, a bit redundant if you ask me. But ahead we have, of course, Monica Crowley, a good friend of mine, a good friend of the show, joining us. Yay, Monica, thank you so much for joining us today.
Always a pleasure, Natalie. Happy New Year, love.
Thank you. Full disclosure, Monica, it's a good friend. So if I look happier than when I have other guests on, that's why. But she also brings wonderful geopolitical analysis and the love of the Trump administration and so much more. But Monica, we're about 2 weeks out from voting starting in GOP primary season. We know Trump is, of course, dominating the polls despite all the lawfare they throw at him. I'd be curious your thoughts, what you think the posse needs to know in terms of going into the primary season, where you think Trump stands, how you think it's all going to play out.
Well, thank you for having Natalie. Sorry, thank you for having me, Natalie. I've got a holiday hangover, even though I don't drink. So let's start with what we can anticipate for this year, because I think it's going to be a wild year in a lot of different ways. And I think there's going to be a lot of unforeseen things coming our way, courtesy of the deep state, the military industrial complex, and the globalists. I mean, if you take a step back before we get into the GOP primary and then the general election, if you think back and remember what they put us through in 2020, they literally launched a virus, shut down the global economy, burned down the country with Antifa and Black Lives Matter, rigged the election, and then the cherry on top was January 6th, which was a Fedsurrection. So they literally sprung 5 catastrophic things on us, all to stop one man and the movement that he leads, America First. And we're all America Firsters here on the War Room. So when you think about what they did 4 years ago, understand that they have something equally, if not more, catastrophic planned for this year, particularly since Donald Trump will in fact be the nominee. They have to stop him, and they have to stop the America First movement. So obviously he's incredibly dominant in the GOP polling as well as the general election polling, and that scares them and frustrates them beyond belief. They cannot believe that this man is still standing. And not just still standing, Natalie, but that he is thriving and he is so dominant. And the America First movement is so incredibly strong, in large part thanks to obviously Donald Trump, but Steve Bannon and you and me and the entire War Room posse. We have not given up, and we have not faltered, and we have not failed. And so they can't believe that, because they've thrown the kitchen sink at this man for literally 8 years, trying to destroy him and eliminate him from the political landscape. So as they survey the landscape, they realize that they have to do they really have to ramp it up to try to sideline him before the election. Because what we learned in 2020 is that 75 million voters overwhelmed their systems to rig that election. And so that they had to shut it all down and figure out a way to make Joe Biden the president. This time around, they know that we're all on to them, and they've got to figure out ways of doing it. You mentioned the lawfare. I think that is a very obvious and important piece of their strategy, for sure. They're trying to secure a conviction, hopefully, for them, hopefully before, maybe the summer convention, certainly before the election, to try to get independents to take another look at Trump and say, you know what, we really can't gamble on this guy. He's a convicted felon. The lawfare piece of this, Jack Smith's cases, the other legal cases, the civil cases around Trump, they have inflicted this on him to try to weaken and damage him and ultimately imprison him so that he cannot serve, or it would be very difficult for him to win and then serve. But I think that's only one piece of the puzzle. Again, think back to 2020, where you had 5 moving parts of a race war burning down the country, the pandemic, the lockdowns, all of it working together. They knew they could not take any chances in 2020 of having Donald Trump reelected. So the same thing applies here. And Natalie, what you are seeing is key Democrats now, like David Axelrod, who speaks for the Obamas and the entire Obama machine running the country now, but also Gavin Newsom and other big Democrats and leftists saying, wait a minute, this lawfare looks like it was a mistake because you're actually doing the impossible. You're turning Donald Trump into a sympathetic figure, and his poll numbers are going up, not down. So now you see big actors on the left wanting to pump the brakes on this. That doesn't mean they're going to back off. Obviously, they're not. But if you think for one second that the lawfare is the only thing they're going to spring on Trump and the rest of us, you have another thing coming. Steve talks about this all the time, as do you, Natalie. Catherine Herridge and others who speak for the deep state and the military-industrial complex, talking about an unforeseen national security event. I don't know what shape it's going to take. None of us do until it's going to be on top of us. But brace this year for a major event that's likely to take place, that the left wants to reshuffle the entire political calculus.
Long gone are the days where elections are decided just based off of, candidates and the policies they promote. But I think the left understands that because they know Donald J. Trump, like he has and did, would win when you see what's going on at the border, when you see what's going on with the economy. But you're so right. They have to introduce various forms of lawfare. I've always said, I think the COVID pandemic really was kind of the opening salvo of the lawfare campaign to influence the election. You could almost argue 2016 was the first stolen election from the personnel subversion angle. But you brought up that Catherine Herridge clip. We're always kind of honed in on that element here in the war, and whether you want to call it predictive programming or just the potential for whether it's, a climate change lockdown, another pandemic, when you see they're still experimenting with the same coronavirus strains over in Wuhan. It makes you wonder a bit. But I'm just curious, you have such a good grasp, of everything going on and how the World Economic Forum, how the United Nations, how these kind of supranational entities have their hands, that's maybe too nice a term, have their claws, their talons involved in all of it. I'm just curious, again, we won't hold you to it, but what do you think their playbook looks like 2024? Do you think they're going to continue down the lawfare specifically against Donald J. Trump, sort of the Jack Smith angle of attack? Or do you think they're going to sort of branch out, broaden out because they see those attacks aren't working?
I think they're committed to this legal process. Natalie, I think they are so far down this road that they're not going to back away from it. I just can't see that happening. So they're going to prosecute this. But the warnings are now out there. Obama himself, and look, Obama's running the left. He's running the Democrat Party. He and Michelle Obama both. And so David Axelrod, his mouthpiece, came out just a couple of days ago, as I said, and said, this is backfiring, guys. This is not a smart way to try to sideline Donald Trump, especially not just the lawfare, but the moves to remove him from the ballots across many states. He's saying, guys, guys, this is not working. And my view, Natalie, is that they have jumped the shark. The left cannot do it. This is what revolutionaries do all the time. They can't not do it. They can't help themselves. They can't stop. They're radicals and they need to push it to the most radical end. But there are warning signs out there that a lot of people who may not even liked Donald Trump, maybe they didn't vote for him last time, but they were looking at him maybe this time, they're saying, wait a minute. This guy is so powerful and he's such a threat to the powers that be that have created this whole Biden catastrophe. And this is what they're trying to do. They can't beat him fair and square. We know that they can't beat him fair and square. But I think a lot of voters who maybe aren't attuned to politics, they're not looking at this saying, oh, you can't beat him fair and square, so you have to do this to him. This is not the way we operate in America. So, of course, because they've jumped the shark, now they have everybody's attention on what they're doing, and it is backfiring. So I think they're going to continue down this road for sure, because they're too far down. And look, they want to secure a conviction. They want him as a convicted felon. So they are going to go down this road. But my point is they're going to bring up other things, just as they did in 2020, to distract us, to create chaos, create violent mayhem, to try to scramble the political calculus going into the election. Donald Trump, though, has proven himself to be the most resilient political candidate, certainly presidential candidate, I have ever seen. And I think most people have ever seen. He is, he gains strength. It's almost like that superhero who gains strength every time he's hit. This is Donald Trump. And a lot of people now see that and respect it. Where they may not have appreciated before, now they see it and they appreciate it. They're willing to give him a second look. So he's got the base, he's got the MAGA base, but now you see all of these other people sort of falling into line. This is why he is leading by almost 70% in the Republican primary. And even if you don't believe that number, Natalie, let's say we cut that in half. Let's say he's 40%, you cut that in half, 20 points ahead. And in the general, he's leading by a couple of points. Even if you cut that in half, he is still leading, according to all of these polls. People want a strong leader. They want somebody who is brilliant and tough and America first to fix all of these problems, just as he did the first time around. And Natalie, all he has to do is basically stand there and point to Biden and say, look, I cleaned up his former boss's mess, Obama's mess. I did it once, I'm going to do it again. That's it.
You brought up distractions and, controlled opposition. I would argue, the establishment would come out in full force against any Republican that were as much of a threat to the system as President Trump was. But there aren't really that many Republicans that they have to go after because they are basically all controlled opposition, right? I think some of the few fighters we have in Congress, right, the Matt Gaetzes of the world, they have a plethora of ethics investigations against him. He obviously had the DOJ lawfare angle too. So I really think it speaks to the true America First warriors. I think you can kind of tell the quality of a candidate by their enemies. And someone who really has, I think, only an enemy in the war room posse in the grassroots base is, of course, Nikki Haley, someone we've been slamming a lot on this show. But I'd be curious for your thoughts, not just on the potential, of her being a VP pick. It seems like we've sort of put that nightmare to rest. But why do you think the system is pushing her, promoting her so hard?
Think about the arc of history, Natalie, because I think it really informs what we're talking about here with Nikki Haley. You think back to, say, 1960 with John F. Kennedy. The system went to Kennedy and said, you will choose Lyndon Johnson as your running mate. And then, of course, we all know what happened to JFK. Fast forward with Ronald Reagan, the Reagans hated the Bushes, especially Mrs. Reagan hated George H.W. Bush. But the system approached Reagan and said, you will choose George H.W. Bush as your vice president. this has happened over and over again and throughout history. George W. Bush, the system came to him and said, you will choose Dick Cheney as your vice president. So I think in this case, we all know that Donald Trump is his own best advisor, and he listens to advice, but he's certainly not going to hear advice or counsel from the deep state. And I think the deep state, the military industrial complex, they are pushing Nikki Haley, because just like with those other presidents, they need a presence inside a White House to do their bidding and to wield this kind of influence on the sitting president. But Donald Trump, after being gone through everything that he has gone through, is not having it. So while I think maybe these deep state powers that be came to him and said, you will choose Nikki Haley as your running mate, he is saying no, which makes him even more of a direct threat to the deep state and all the dark forces out there, the globalists, because they know that they cannot control him. And if he has a vice president that they also cannot control, well, then they know all bets are off here. So it's going to be interesting to see who Trump considers. I think he still believes he needs a female candidate. I don't know whether or not that's true, but there are so many great America firsters here. And you know what, Natalie, to me, and I don't know this to be true, but I suspect that President Trump, when he's doing this calculation for a running mate, he's got a couple of criteria. The first one is it has to be somebody who is loyal. And not just to him, but to the America First movement. So no more Republican tools, no more establishment figures, certainly not a deep state figure. The second criteria would be that they're willing and able to do the job of the presidency if, God forbid, something were to happen to him. And three, that they are completely aligned with the MAGA movement as well. He needs someone he can trust. Not just personally, which he does need that, but also someone he can trust with the agenda. Because remember, he can only serve one term. So whoever he chooses is going to be the logical heir to the America First movement.
You're right. Donald J. Trump serves the American people. I think Nikki J. No, I don't even know what her middle name is. Nikki Haley. Serves the defense contractors, serves her donors, right? It's kind of the same critique of the DeSantis model as a campaign. Really, they're the real listless vessels, right? Their priorities are just what their donors want it to be. And I think one issue we see that manifest particularly profoundly on is immigration. Of course, they love their cheap labor. And I think we're seeing that on full display right now with what's going on the southern border. I'm just curious, Biden's obviously enjoying his vacations as America is being invaded by the Visigoths, as Steve would say. I'm just curious, you've always, I think, taken the line that these, crises, whether it's what's going on in Ukraine, whether it's what's going on our southern border, it's not incompetence, it's intentional. And do you think that, we can kind of rest our case, again, much to the detriment of the country, but with the numbers we're seeing, do you think it's fair to say that it is intentional and that we're not going to see any meaningful movement on it? Or do you think Congress is going to step up and do something to actually secure the border?
Well, as Steve has been saying, you shut down the border or you shut down the government. I think that is absolutely necessary and the correct approach, Natalie, but I don't see a lot of Republicans beyond Matt Gaetz, Marjorie Taylor Greene, and, a number of other MAGA heroes in the Congress being able and willing to step up and do that. This is 100% intentional. And it was literally from day one. And the reason we know this is because, first of all, this regime is completely evil. Secondly, he's been in office for 3 years. So if it weren't intentional, just out of the desire for sheer political survival, you think that they would have changed course the way Jimmy Carter changed course at the end of his term with regard to foreign policy, Afghanistan, et cetera. Jimmy Carter started to change. He wanted some tax cuts to try to get the economy going. Even if you wanted to torpedo the country, you want your own political survival to be intact and that of your party. So you change gears like Bill Clinton did, too. You see none of that. with Joe Biden. None. There's no changing of tactic whatsoever. In fact, it's accelerating. As you guys always talk about, this is accelerated decline. They're not slamming on the brakes. They're accelerating the process. Remember, they lost 4 years under Donald Trump. Donald Trump brought the country back, restored greatness, enforced the border, developed a strong, booming economy, delivered world peace. They can't have any of that. So they look at the Trump years, whereas we look at it as a huge success. They look at it as a lost number of years that they've had to, make up under Joe Biden. That's why Biden and his team has worked with all deliberate speed to try to ruin the country and really the West. So, we're in this position now where the southern border, this is a complete invasion, has been ongoing for 3 years. We have no idea how many illegals are in, how many potential terrorists are in. I've been screaming about this on my podcast for the last 2 years now, that the terrorist threat, when these inevitable terrorist attacks occur, the blood is going to be on Joe Biden's hands and Kamala Harris's hands and Mayorkas, everybody else responsible for this wide open border. There are going to be dead Americans in the street like there were on 9/11. And it is a direct line from Joe Biden, Mayorkas, the rest of this administration to that inevitable event or events. Okay, so this is a fundamentally evil regime. Evil is running this country right now. And the people who are suffering the most are average Americans like you and me and everybody watching this show. We always bear the brunt of this. Just a quick little anecdote. A friend of mine has a very wealthy friend who spent New Year's in Cabo because he's a billionaire. And, he made a crack about Mexico because he's sitting in Mexico. He made a crack about the border. And he said something like, oh, I bet you're really upset about all the brown people in Mexico coming across. And I said, stop telling me that story right now, because I have no time or patience for the super wealthy, the elites, the ruling class, and the globalists, Natalie, who are completely buffeted from any kind of economic consequence, national security consequence, basic human consequence. They're completely buffered from the consequences of what this evil regime is doing. And I said, don't even tell me the rest of the story, because what he started to say was sick. Making fun of us for caring about the U.S. border? No. But this is how the globalists and the ruling class think. And this is why they continue to support people like Joe Biden and this evil regime. So we have our work cut out for us, Natalie, going into this year, because we got to convince regular voters. We've got to convince so many others that whole line of thinking and this whole line of policy is evil and the destruction is real and the hour is late.
World peace and secure borders are very bad for the globalist business model. Monica Crowley, who has a absolutely fantastic podcast, you guys have to listen to, have a lot of the War Room-esque guests, but you really drill down and go deep and get granular with them. Really some wonderful, wonderful content, so make sure you go get her show. But if the War Room Posse wants to follow you, get the show, do all the things, read your work, where can they go to do all that?
Thank you for the kind words, Natalie. I really appreciate it. I've got to have you and Steve back on the show as well as we kick off this new year. So I hope you'll come back. On social media, well, first of all, the podcast, Monica Crowley Podcast, get it wherever you get your podcasts, Apple, Google, Spotify, Stitcher, the entire evil empire of podcasts. It's available all there. And then on social media, on Instagram, I'm at Monica Crowley _. And on Twitter and True Social and Getter, I'm at Monica Crowley. Thank you so much, Natalie.
Of course. Thank you so much for joining us. Now we have the hammer, Mike Howell from Heritage. We can wait until after the break to get into this really bombshell story about the CIA and Fauci and all this wonderful stuff, really evil colluding. But real quick, before we go to break, we got about 2 minutes. I'm curious your thoughts going to 2024, particularly Congress, where we stand on immigration. I know they're going down for the photo op soon. What's your take on that?
So 2024 will be the year of putting up or shutting up. I mean, we have a deadline coming up for the funding of the Department of Homeland Security and other government functions. Either House Republicans decide that the border is important enough to take decisive action, or they don't. And so we're going to have a really clear answer on that very, very soon. The border's been overrun. Monica nailed this. It's 3 years in a premeditated, continued crisis to overflow this country and to change the demographics of it in such a way that benefits the ruling class and the left. It's a voter recruitment, mass human resettlement program. And the congressmen on the right have no problem talking about this, doing the photo ops, going around the country. But their job as legislators is to legislate. And so far, over the course of this Congress, we've seen continuing resolution to continuing to allow the border crisis. We've seen Mayorkas go unmolested in his position as secretary of the chief implementer of this. And the American people are going to see, towards the end of this month, going into next one, whether they actually pump the brakes on this. They have the power to do it. And so we come back on here in March, we're going to know whether this is a bipartisan agreement to have a border crisis or not. And I think we're going to have to work from that point. But we need to keep the pressure on Congress right now because it's in their hands. And we shouldn't just blame Biden for this. Obviously, he's the one who's created it. But there's also those who could stop it who haven't stopped it. And so that's where we need to focus now.
Yeah, no more messaging bills. Or how about instead of focusing on banning gas stoves or making sure we can't do that, we actually secure the southern border. Their priorities are so messed up, but luckily we got people like you and Heritage Oversight to fill in and step up. We'll get into the lawsuit you guys have filed with the origins of COVID, CIA, some really evil collusion going on there. We'll be right back after this break.
War Room Battleground with Stephen K. Bannon.
Now, when I saw this story drop in the New York Post, you guys know a lot of my early days, my reporting was focused on Fauci and the origins of COVID, EcoHealth Alliance, the Chinese Communist Party, all of those wonderful actors that quite often seem to be colluding together. Even this story made my jaw drop, which says a lot, and it has to do with the CIA withholding records that basically show that some of their analysts who were tasked with determining the origins of COVID were potentially paid off. So no one really knows because, like we said, we don't have the records, but to switch their findings, to switch their conclusions in support of the, of course, mainstream media establishment regime-favored narrative that COVID developed naturally, the whole wet market theory that you guys have heard. Now, luckily, Mike Howell and our friends over at Heritage stepped in to basically, if I'm correct, sue the CIA to get access to these records because they're not turning them over to Congress. Mike, if you want to walk us through this lawsuit, I'm sure the audience, their heads are probably blowing up, but I'm sure they would appreciate it.
Yeah, you did a really good job of explaining the fact pattern there. In September of this year, a whistleblower from the CIA went to the House of Representatives and said just what you just said, that there was this COVID origins discovery team, and on it, there were 7 folks. 6 of them thought it was a lab leak. 1 of the 7 thought it could have been a zoonotic transfer. I mean, this is the madness that, hey, it could have come from a wet market, someone not cooking their, bat to temperature, and then it spread from there. And so the CIA famously came out and said, oh, we don't have any certainty one way or the other. That wasn't true. The consensus opinion of 6 of the 7 was lab leak. And so then the CIA came out and said, nothing to see here. We just don't know. And that propelled the narrative that basically saying lab leak was a conspiracy theory. It was akin to a hate crime. You had things like the Stop Asian Hate Bill. You had Nancy Pelosi in Chinatown. All this stuff happening at the time, which was intended to interfere in the 2020 election because it hurt the President Trump's campaign if you said it was his fault as opposed to a Chinese lab leak fault. And so that's what was happening at the time being. This was a deep state interference into the election. And so what we're doing is suing the CIA for the underlying document set that the whistleblower brought up. Congress hasn't been able to get those documents out of the CIA yet, and so we're stepping in to fill that kind of lawfare litigation void by compelling the release. So we're taking them to federal court. We announced our lawsuit, I believe, on the 22nd of December, and we're going to get them in front of a federal judge. Obviously, they're going to come and say, oh, it's classified. We're going to say, no, it's not. Paying off your employees to change their conclusions is not classified. And guess what? It was a public proclamation that you all made that you didn't have certainty one way or the other. And so we intend to get those documents to lay this story out and to, hopefully harness some accountability against the deep state, which has really skated this entire Congress without any limitations on their abuse. They're running roughshod over this country.
Seems like you guys are stepping up to, I think, fill the void of what should be, or what currently is, a rather defanged and just not really forceful Congress. In other words, they send out the subpoenas, right? They send out the strongly worded letters, and then the CIA doesn't comply. And then it seems like that narrative, that storyline just sort of falls flat. Thank God we have people like you and your organization that step up and sort of fill the void. But why do you think, these legislators, whether it's the coronavirus subcommittee, the weaponization subcommittee, they say, hey, you guys don't want to play ball with us on this story, you're not getting your new headquarters, right? You're not getting whatever funds that is you wanted to have for this new building, right? You name it. I'm just curious, do you think we're going to see a shift in that mentality come 2024, particularly on the impeachment front? What do you think the battle plan is going to be, and what do you think, more importantly, it should be?
Right. So recognizing that historical failure of Congress to actually achieve accountability is why we started the Oversight Project. I was in the Trump administration defending against those investigations. I was conducting investigations for the House into the Obama administration. I quickly realized that there wasn't much in the world of consequences being applied. And so we built the Oversight Project to fill that void, to actually take things to federal court. It's why we were at the Hunter Biden plea deal, seeing that get blown up and writing briefs and suing virtually every major government agency across the board to produce documents that aren't being produced elsewhere. I think this is a terminal and existential problem for the oversight and congressional, legislative basically experience in this country, is that without achieving accountability, people are going to lose faith in the institution. And I'm really worried in this 2024 year that bill is going to come due. There's a lot of promises that have been made about who they're going to go after, who they're going to rein in, and it just hasn't happened yet. I think there's some real heroes out there. The problem is you need a conference to do it. You need a majority vote, and there's deep divides that have been skated over, and we spend too much time celebrating the announcement of a process, whether it's sending a letter or somebody saying something snippy at a hearing, and we don't spend enough time saying, no, what we actually want is not the process. We want the end result of returning accountability. I think James Comer has done a terrific job in terms of getting the actual receipts out of the banking institutions that the First Family used to set up their, what appears to me to be a criminal enterprise. And I'm sure that's common sense across the country at this point. So that is the investigative work we like to see, going out, getting the receipts, the proof, the evidence. What we don't like to see are just, announcement of processes, whether it's when former Speaker McCarthy said, hey, we're going to do an impeachment, then they didn't have the vote. Then they finally had a vote, and now there's kind of an impeachment thing happening. We want to see, it's 2024, the brakes being put on this administration. And so that's what we're here to help do by grabbing the records that Congress, hasn't been able to get in some instances and forcing the Biden administration into federal court. They can go into a congressional hearing and say whatever they want. It's a whole different ball game when you have a federal judge there compelling the disclosure of information and potentially holding them in contempt if they don't. We don't need to seek a House of Representatives vote to get that kind of accountability and consequence. And so that's why we built this machine we have at the Oversight Project, to fill that void. And we hope that, elected officials across the country wake up and realize this is probably the one area where expectations on them are the heaviest. The history books will remember whether they held this administration accountable, whether they stopped the deep weaponization of the FBI and intelligence agencies. It's not going to be on messaging bills. The history books will write about whether this Congress stopped this administration running roughshod over all of our institutions.
So where are you guys going with your investigations now, or on the lawsuit front? What's sort of your guys' battle plan for 2024?
So I think chief amongst our priorities is the weaponization of government. And so that means we're suing the DOJ, the FBI, the CIA, and related agencies quite a bit. I think as Monica, your last guest, laid out, there's a lot that's in store for 2024. What they're going to cook up next, it could be anything from another, COVID type scenario, another election operation, who knows? And so we need to be in court compelling the disclosure of documents and getting people under oath as much as possible throughout the duration of what I see as this conflict that'll be a year long. The second thing, and not necessarily say it's a lower priority, but this is just kind of like the top buckets, is the border crisis. I mean, we've been down there since day one. We've used our advanced technology to track the cell phone movement of illegals through nonprofits like Catholic Charities into the interior of the country. And we're going to keep pumping that to get, the story out there that it's not just the Biden administration doing this and profiting from it. It's a whole web, a conspiracy, if you will, of international import with millions and millions, if not billions of dollars behind it. because it's not just about stopping the Biden administration, who is really the instrumentality for this, but kind of these globalist actors that are seeking to fundamentally change America forever in ways that'll be very hard to undo unless we have a mass deportation campaign. And then another thing that we're kind of seeing an increase on the Biden administration side is the amount of effort they've put into building out the apparatus for what I view as a really sick venture, and that's the transgender infrastructure for children and adults alike. We're seeing agency by agency these detailed plans, including at the prisons, to build out a regime not to just, say it's okay if you do that, but to encourage it, to facilitate it, to promote it, to pay for it. And they're trying to do that at the biggest employer in the United States because they know that trickles down, controls corporate behavior, controls schoolroom behavior, and ends up with your child being recruited into a transgender delusion that'll change their life forever and for the worse. And so we're fighting on that very sick battlefront, but someone needs to be there. And we're pumping out documents on that left and right. And I think showing the story that the Biden administration said they were going to build roads and bridges. I don't see roads and bridges going up anywhere. What I see are just infrastructural developments to transition your kids. And it's disgusting, and we're going to stop it.
You guys do such wonderful work. If the War Room Posse wants to follow you, stay up to date with everything you guys are working on, help you guys out, where can they go to do all that?
Absolutely. So on X, I'm at Howell Tweets, and the Oversight Project is at Oversight PR. That's the letters PR.
Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, thank you.
Of course. That anger right there, which I'm glad people like him are on our side. And see, we do have a good team of fighters going into 2024, but that's the anger that really inspired me to start. I'm sure you guys have probably heard from now my own clothing line. I just launched it yesterday. It's called She's So Right. If you guys are wondering why I have hats behind me, this is my favorite one. It says misinformation, but it's all made in the United States. We're partnered with companies and factories and employers who don't hate you, don't hate your values, and who really are committed to bringing manufacturing jobs back to the United States in a sustainable way. You guys always hear the refrain from the mainstream media, from the corporate donors that, oh, those are the jobs that Americans don't want to do. I made sure that the companies that I partnered with, the wages they were paying their employees, how they were going about engaging the apparel manufacturing and garment manufacturing process actually was sustainable. And I don't use that in the way the left uses that word. So if you guys want to check out any of my collections, I will say they are going fast. You can go to she'soright.co to shop all of that now. I'll be on, I think, tomorrow talking a little bit more about my experiences with all that. With Steve, I learned just really some interesting things. I think it was my first time really working to take down the CCP, working with, American manufacturers and factories. And I learned that making products in the United States, it is actually doable. It's just your priority can't be like all these woke corporations pushing a subversive political agenda or making money. But if you make your company about really, I think, putting America first, there is a way to do that. So I'll be talking a little bit more about that tomorrow with Steve. But in the meantime, if you want to go to the website, you can go to she'soright.co, not .com. But our next guest, speaking of immigration, your heads are probably also going to blow up. This story, I'll just read you the headline because it encapsulates everything you need to know. And then we'll have Philip from the Daily Caller, whose last name I'm not even going to try to pronounce because it's too complicated for me. It's above my pay grade. But exclusive, Biden admin. Editor's note, we call him a regime here. Biden regime watered down vetting process for Chinese illegal immigrants. Emails show you obtain those emails exclusively. Philip, if you want to walk us through this story, I'm sure the audience would begrudgingly appreciate it.
Hi, Natalie. Thanks for having me on. Congratulations with the new product line. My favorite so far that I've seen is the low social credit score. That's the one I want. Well,
thank you. I'll ship you one.
Yeah. So anyhow, we had an investigation drop today, and the thrust of it is that we obtained a leaked email from Customs and Border Protection. It was an internal email that was sent in April 2023. And at the heart of the email are a number of changes to the way that border agents are to vet Chinese illegal immigrants. They really fall into two categories. The first, which is in the email that we linked to and which we've tweeted out, is that the agents are no longer required to perform what's called phone downloads, which is when they encounter an illegal and they then take their phone, plug it into a machine, and cross-reference their data against a database containing known terrorist organizations and hostile entities. Secondly, they have taken what was a pre-existing list of approximately 40 questions, which they referred to as quote-unquote an in-depth interview, and they've reduced that down to 5 quote-unquote basic questions that they would ask the Chinese illegal immigrants that they encounter. And so what we found is that the questions that are remaining, according to the individual who shared this email with us on the condition of anonymity, fearing U.S. government reprisal, his opinion, as well as an expert's opinion, is that in effect this has sped up the flow. It's increased the speed at which the agents are processing and admitting Chinese illegal immigrants into the United States. It's lowered the bar for them to enter. And the only questions that are remaining out of the original 40 are 5 questions which seek to determine whether or not they have ties to the Chinese government, Chinese Communist Party, Chinese military, or there's another category which is for their place of origin, and that is to determine if they have any ties to Islamic terrorism. Specifically, they're looking at the western province of Xinjiang and the Uyghur ethnicity. And so that those are the 5 questions. We also got a hold of the previous list of approximately 40 questions to sort of compare those, and that list had an additional couple categories. For instance, checking out if these individuals have any type of weapons training, information regarding the exact type of smuggling operation that they might have been a part of, et cetera, and so on.
I know your background is sort of in foreign influence ops conducted by the Chinese Communist Party. We are kindred spirits on that investigative front, but I think the only logical question to what you just said, again, I think it's still hard to process, is why would the Biden regime be doing this? It seems like a policy that these Chinese Communist Party influence op types would be very happy and very pleased with. Did your source give you any insight into why they're expediting this process? Do you know why?
Yes. And so speaking with them, there's a theory. We don't have the exact reason, but the theory is that the number of Chinese illegal immigrants, and just, of course, across the board, the number of illegal immigrants total has increased exponentially. And 23 email, the process to vet Chinese illegal immigrants took upwards of 2 to 3 hours. Now, you have to imagine that the average Border Patrol agent does not have any type of Chinese language background, and so they were relying entirely on Google Translate to run through this document of some 40 questions. They were also using, at times, apparently there were some linguists, some translators associated with this operation, but they were few and far between. And so ultimately they were just overrun, and they were unable to process the vast number of individuals. And so it seems like they have just decided to, as one of our experts who is a former Border Patrol agent, so beautifully put, trying to just cover their own asses, trying to say, hey, we've done something. We've quote unquote vetted these folks. And when later on something occurs, they can point to that, when in actuality, they have not even scratched the surface. Because after asking these 5 basic questions, the vast majority of individuals are just released then into the interior of the United States, and they connect with one of these NGOs that your last guest, Mr. Howell, was referring to. And, that doesn't really instill much confidence in the American citizen that there could be, whether they're individuals connected with the cartels or connected with the Chinese government or worse, just running around the interior, and they've been given apparently a order to appear before a judge at times now because of the backlog, some maybe 10 years into the future, in 2031 or something like that. Just preposterous.
We've got about a minute and a half, unfortunately, before I have to let you go. But if you could tease the other exclusive that you have, the CCP-tied firm slated to build massive facility near sensitive U.S. military sites. Give us a brief synopsis in about like a minute. I'm sorry, I wish I could hold you longer.
Totally understand. Long story short, there's a company called C-Nano USA, which has a parent company called C-Nano Jiangsu. They're slated to build a giant facility near Kansas City. And we investigated this thanks to, shout out, Heritage Action and Heritage Oversight Project for beginning this investigation and sharing their initial research with us, which we expanded upon. And this facility is going to be 35 miles from Fort Leavenworth, 70 miles from Whiteman Air Force Base. And the company behind this has got ties to the Chinese Communist Party, the Chinese government, the Chinese intelligence services, as well as the Chinese military. That's the brief rundown.
Philip, if people want to follow you, read the story, get all access to all your work, where can they go to do that?
I'd encourage them to go to the Daily Caller and check out my work there. Otherwise, you can find me on Twitter at Lenczycki. That's LENCZYCKI. Philip, thank you so much, and I look forward to getting my T-shirt or hat.
Yes, I will send it to you. Fair warning, it is pink, but men can wear pink too. It's a hot take in the war room. Steve may disagree, but Philip, thank you so much for joining us.
Appreciate you.
Of course. And War Room Posse, if you want to stop giving your money to companies that manufacture in China, I'm just saying, she's so right.co. You guys know with Article 7 of China's national intelligence law, any company that does business over there can be requisitioned and ordered by the CCP to help fulfill the ends of the state, whatever that may mean. Who knows what they're doing with your data? Who knows what subversive, I'd argue probably anti-Trump agenda, messages, stuff like that they're pushing with their products. So it's why you guys got to shop made in the United States. But don't worry, Steve will be back for the show tomorrow. You can go to she'soright.co. You can always follow me, Natalie G. Winters. You can follow shop She's So Right. And I feel like the low social credit score hat is also a good one. But War Room Posse, you guys got to go read that Daily Caller story. I'm serious about how they're building Chinese Communist Party run factories, facilities in the United States, only under Joe Biden. See, we'll be back tomorrow morning. Have a good one. Natalie Winters out.